Here's a fun fact for you. The Warlords of Draenor expansion released on November 13th of 2014. That was just shy of the 10-year anniversary of World of Warcraft, which originally released on November 23rd of 2004. So about 10 years between the release of the original World of Warcraft game and the Warlords of Draenor expansion. Now, as I'm recording this, it's currently April of 2025, which means that Warlords of Draenor released just over 10 years ago. As of today here in April, about 10 years and about 5 months is how long that Warlords of Draenor, how long it's been since Warlords of Draenor released, which means that the span of time from the original WoW release to the release of Warlords of Draenor is a shorter period of time than the release of Warlords of Draenor to today, which means that Warlords has been part of World of Warcraft longer than it hasn't been. Just something to think about. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player and so on. My name is Devilor, and today we're finally doing it. We are finally diving into the state of professions in World of Warcraft, and honestly, MMOs in general. You see, to me, at least in my own opinion, and it's an opinion show, so we're gonna talk about what my opinions on things are. Crazy, I know. But to me, at least, a profession, the concept of professions, the very essence of what a profession should be, literally what that word means is it's something that you do as a means to support yourself. It's the concept of something that you are either goods or services that you are providing in exchange for something else with someone else. It's also where the term trade skills come from. Literally the word trade being part of that means that it is something that you do this thing, you create these things in order to engage in trade or commerce or something similar with other people. So to me, the best profession systems and the best profession environments and trade skill environments in MMORPGs are when it's a system that anyone can benefit from this system existing. Anyone can get something out of this, but not everyone has to directly engage in it. It's something that the people who want to pursue a given profession will then be able to create things that they can then trade with other players in some capacity. And yeah, you'll probably make stuff for yourself along the way, but that's not the sole purpose. The primary goal of something that, if you're going to call it a profession, if you're going to call it a trade skill, the goal should be I make things, and then most of the things that I make, I give to other players in exchange for who knows what else. And a big part of what makes me feel that way is just the idea of the whole fantasy behind being a master craftsman, someone who has become very, very skilled in their trade, such to the point that other people would actually want to seek them out for their skills and their abilities in whatever it is that they're plying their trade as. Looking more directly at things like throughout history or in mythology and so on, like you can think of examples like Masamune, the legendary Japanese swordsmith, or looking at mythology like Thor has Mjolnir, but Thor didn't make Mjolnir. Mjolnir was made by a couple of dwarves. They were named Brocker and Sindri, I think, from memory, at least according to the legends and all that. Thor didn't make Mjolnir. Thor just wields Mjolnir. It was made by these couple of dwarves instead. Even in more recent times and more recent fiction, like The Mandalorian, one of the early plot points in the Mandalorian series was about how he needed to get this the special ingredients so that he could then take them to an armorer who would then make armor for him. He wasn't getting this so that he could make the armor himself. He was taking it to somebody who could then craft him something that he could then wear while heading out into battle. And obviously there's no reason that these people can't be powerful warriors themselves or weren't powerful warriors themselves in the case of historical figures. The core of the fantasy is that this is someone who you seek out for their skills. You go and, oh, we need to get something made. And so we're going to seek out this legendary swordsmith, or we're going to seek out these legendary dwarves or whatever. And one example of an MMORPG that really nailed that, in my opinion, was Star Wars Galaxies. At least in the original version of the game before the whole NGE thing happened. The way Star Wars Galaxies worked is that artisan and crafting was literally you were spending your, not talent points, but effectively the same as talent points, putting your experience towards leveling up your artisan tree. And there was this whole grid that you could fill that out. And once you got all the way to the top of that, you were a master artisan and you could make speeders essentially. And there was like this whole big thing where becoming a master artisan meant that you were spending a ton of time just crafting things because you needed to earn experience, and that was all you could really do unless you were like already built into something else. You were spending all this time just crafting things, and you needed to do something with these, so you would then sell them to other players. And that's what I did back in the Star Wars Galaxies days. Before I played WoW, I played SWG. Well, okay, I played a few other MMORPGs before I played WoW, but one of them that I played before WoW was SWG, and I was a master artisan. And it was a really, really cool experience at the time, and a really immersive crafting experience, because I wasn't going out and fighting things constantly. I wasn't doing bounty missions or anything like that. What I did was I made speeders for people, and it eventually led to this whole like very emergent gameplay sort of interaction where I ended up joining this town. I think it was called Moss Defiant or something. Shout out if that means anything to you from back in the SWG days. But I ended up joining this town specifically because they wanted somebody in their town that could make speeders, and they wanted to have a reason for people to come there. And I ended up like specifically working with this one other guy who was like, hey, here's a workshop and a house and a storefront. I'm going to get you set up with all this so that you can like actually be making these speeders and selling them to people so that we can have that available here in our town. That was really, really cool and very unusual and very unique experience that happened back then. And this was something that I was doing, like this was what I was focusing all of my time on in Star Wars Galaxies, was having all these different ways and all these different tasks and such that I needed to do so that I could then create speeders. And there were a few other items as well, but speeders was kind of the big one that people really wanted a ton of back then, because everybody wanted a speeder, obviously. This was what I spent a lot of my time in, and gameplay inside of Star Wars Galaxies was really working on this. I wasn't the adventurer going out and doing all the shooting and the fighting and everything. I was the guy that you came to so that you could get the stuff to then go and do the shooting and fighting yourself. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that every game needs to be built in such a way where if you are a crafter, you are not also a fighter. In fact, that was one of the few negative things about how that was built in Star Wars Galaxies, is that I felt like, well, okay, I've put all this effort into becoming a master artisan. I kind of now can't really enjoy any of the rest of the game. All I do is make speeders, and that's why I eventually got bored and stopped playing Star Wars Galaxies. But it was still the sort of thing that like, it was very, very cool that I wasn't making these things just for myself. Obviously, I did make a speeder for myself, and I rode around on the speeder that I made for myself, but I was also putting all this effort into crafting things and creating things to then give to other players. And the problem then is that World of Warcraft, like most other MMORPGs, at least historically, hasn't really treated trade skills as something where you're creating things as a profession, as a trade skill. It almost ends up being like this second progression path for your own personal power gain. And that's historically been especially true for professions like, blacksmithing, tailoring, leatherworking, to some degree engineering. These professions that you really only take because you want to use the things that you are getting from it, not because you're then planning to make a bunch of stuff and sell it to other people. Now, way back in the day, way back in the OG vanilla days, this wasn't as much the case back then. And it's not as much the case today either, but we're going to circle back around to that part of the discussion in a minute. Just looking historically over the flow of professions and how they've worked over the history of World of Warcraft. Back in the day, it was usually the case that if you wanted something crafted, you just went and found somebody who could craft that thing, because most of the things that could be crafted were not bind on pickup. They weren't like special, unique things just for yourself. There were a few of those here and there, again, especially with engineering. But like if you wanted an Arcanite Reaper, for example, this was one of the biggest, most important weapons for any Ret Paladin or any two-handed warrior back then. If you wanted an Arcanite Reaper, you gathered all the materials, and then you found someone who could make you an Arcanite Reaper, and you went to them, they made you an Arcanite Reaper. You were like, hooray. It said the name of the crafter on it. That was actually like important back then, because then you could remember who crafted the thing and tell your friends that when they wanted an Arcanite Reaper, who to go to. You would go and find someone who could craft you this Arcanite Reaper, or you would decide, I'm going to invest this time so that I can craft it myself. And then once you've done all that effort, you're probably going to still want to make those for other people because it's a decent money-making option. But then pretty much immediately, at least in the long history of World of Warcraft, they kind of did away with that. Immediately in the Burning Crusade, at the very least, from blacksmithing perspective, again, using that concept of the Arcanite Reaper, now all of a sudden it was like the Lunar Crescent, which was a bind-on pickup axe So a ton of people leveled blacksmithing, not because they wanted to create these blacksmithing items for other players, or they really even wanted to engage in profession gameplay. They just wanted a lunar crescent, and this was the only way to get it. Not only was it a bind on pickup item, but it also required a bind on pickup reagent. So you had to, if I remember correctly, it came out of Tempest Keep. You had to go and get a nether vortex or something. This is all off the top of my head. I didn't look this up ahead of time, but you specifically had to go and get a bind on pickup item, which at the time was bind on pickup. I don't think they are anymore. And then you had to use that to create this lunar crescent, which was a very, very good two-handed axe that every warrior wanted. I think most rep paladins wanted it back in the day as well. And you wanted this because it was very good, but it was bind on pickup as well. You couldn't get someone else to craft that for you. So then this had the effect of sort of separating WoW's professions out into money-making professions, things that you use and you build up primarily to sell things to other people. So enchanting and alchemy at the time in TBC were the big ones for selling things to other people, and mostly alchemy in that case. And then on the other hand, you had these min-max professions like blacksmithing, like leatherworking, if there were I don't actually remember if there were specific leatherworking BOP items back then. I know tailoring was huge for a lot of casters for a long time because of the BOP tailoring sets you could make that didn't have any stamina on them, so you died all the time, but it still was the most throughput as a result. It kind of turned those into these min-max professions that you leveled not because you were interested in professions, not because you wanted to trade things with other players, but because you wanted to make the items for yourself and then kind of never bother with that profession ever again. As time went on, eventually we got around to the profession bonuses, which were very, very heavily featured in Mists of Pandaria, where you ended up with things like alchemists getting extra benefits from flasks, or ring enchants and fur linings, so that enchanters and leatherworkers could have like an extra player power benefit for having leveled those professions themselves. But that didn't really solve the problem of these professions not, in fact, if anything, that expanded the problem directly by turning every profession into a min-max profession. So it was no longer the case that you leveled a profession at all because you wanted to be able to sell things to other people, except for, like, again, maybe alchemy and enchanting. But even then it was like, I kind of wish I had one of these other professions instead for the bonuses. You still leveled these professions because you wanted to be able to make the things that gave you the most benefit, or you were specifically min-maxing to say, like, all right, I know that these two professions give the best benefit for my class and specs, so I guess those are the professions that I'm leveling. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing in terms of like just straight up gameplay, like there's a million examples of some sort of grind you do to get a thing that then makes your character more powerful. That's just how these games tend to work. I've always found it, and I always did find it frustrating that it was taking this concept of professions, this idea of something that you were doing so that you could sell your wares to other players, because that was the gameplay you wanted to interact with. That was what you wanted to do. You wanted this as a money-making option for yourself, essentially, or a trade option, or just that level of player-to-player interaction, something to put up on the auction house, or something to sell to other players in a capacity, or in some capacity. It was taking that concept and warping it into something that you were only doing so that, again, you could level up the profession yourself. You got the benefit. And then once you had that benefit, you never even opened your profession pane ever again, because why would you? Then Warlords of Draenor came along and it got rid of most of those profession bonuses with the ostensibly so that it was be like, pick whatever professions you want. That way now you don't have to focus on what professions are going to min-max for your character. Nobody gets any direct benefits from professions anymore. Pick whatever profession it is that you want to engage in. The problem then being that most professions just sucked. Like alchemy, enchanting, jewel crafting, those stayed useful for a while. Inscription to some extent for a little while, but they kept doing weird things with glyphs. And then engineering has always kind of been its own weird little niche space where if you want these little extra toys and stuff that you get from it, then you level engineering. But if you don't, then you don't. But the benefits of being a leather worker, being a tailor, being a blacksmith kind of ceased to exist at that point. There wasn't really any reason to be these at all, because not only could you not get any direct benefit from leveling these professions, but also nobody wanted to buy any of the things you could make. There was always a few outliers here and there, like a couple of items that maybe you could sell some of these here and there, or you might occasionally make like Like there was a period of time where blacksmiths could make a thing that you could add a socket to pieces of gear, or tailors were making, there was that period of time where tailors and leather workers and so on were making like these specific like shoulder enchants and leg enchants and stuff like that. But it was like just one item that you used every once in a while, as compared to like enchanting, which made that on several pieces of gear. Jewel crafting, which was jewel crafting. You always needed jewels, especially during the periods of time where every piece of gear had gem sockets on it. Um, and then things like inscription, which again was all over the place. But alchemy has always been one that's like constantly in need, because flasks, potions, etc., those just continue to exist and be valuable. So that left the game in this state for quite a while, where Blizzard kept trying to do things to make there be some reason to want to engage with any of the other professions. But it really just kind of boiled down to, if you were interested in doing profession gameplay, you probably wanted to do alchemy, enchanting, or jewel crafting, which ultimately led to the big profession revamp in Dragonflight, where they were trying to resolve a lot of that. And on paper, like at first blush, a lot of what happened in Dragonflight and a lot of where they took professions with Dragonflight, and now mostly the same system coming into the War Within as well. There's been a couple tweaks here and there, but it's still pretty much the same. It sounds great. It adds a lot of depth to crafting for people that really want to be like super into crafting. That just makes it, fleshes that out a whole bunch. But then you have like the crafting order system on top of that, which means that you can still have things like BOP materials. You can still have time-gated materials like sparks of fractures of whatever they're called. Sparks of fortune, not fractures. Fractures of sparks of those whole things. But anyway, you can still use the crafting system to allow for a lot of these really, really cool items to exist in ways that don't end up breaking the game, because you can't just funnel all of the rare materials into one person or buy a ton of them off the auction house and now you have a full best in slot crafted set on day one. And on paper, again, this really feels like it sort of like it's really trying to go towards that legendary craftsman vibe, that feeling of, I want to get this item. I don't make it myself. I'm going to go find a crafter, or I'm going to use the crafting order system to get someone else to make it for me. And that to me is that is what profession should be, is I want this item. I don't need to level this profession to get that item myself. I can just get a crafter who has leveled that profession, because that was the site of game, the part of gameplay that they wanted to interact with. They were excited about doing profession gameplay for this reason, so that then they could craft these items for other players. The problem is it doesn't really work out in practice. See, the problem I have with the crafting order system, at least how it exists currently, is it still requires you to wrap your head around a significant portion of how crafting works just to be able to get things that you want to have built. And this is mostly due to the nature of how optional reagents work, which tend to be kind of overcomplicated for someone who is not wanting to be a crafter themselves. They just want to go to a crafter and say, hey, I would like a cool axe. Please make for me a cool axe. Like walking up to the crafting orders NPC and opening the UI and being like, oh, okay, I want to make it. I'll click on axe, two-handed axe. Here's this thing that I can have somebody make. And then you look at it and it's like immediately like, okay, but what materials would you like to be used in this thing? And I don't know about you guys. I feel like that's like going to buy a car and the guy goes, okay, what engine and transmission and what carburetor would you like in this sort of thing? Like that to me is like, no, I want the end result. I want that thing. You figure out how to make it. I don't know how to make it. I'm not the crafter here. I'm just going to run down the list of the optional reagents. This is skipping the actual like reagents for the thing, the actual crafting materials for it, because I'm a little annoyed at the whole like 1 to 3 star thing on those, but it's fine. It's whatever. That I'm not as worried about. It's mostly the optional reagents that I think add too much complexity to the end user, to the customer in this situation, in terms of figuring out how to get this thing actually made. There's Sparks of Fortune, which have this whole, the way that you get Sparks of Fortune is kind of by just doing stuff. And so for the most part, you just kind of end up with them. But if you're ever sitting there and thinking, I don't have enough Spark of Fortunes, the way to find out how and when to get another one is so convoluted and weird that it's annoying to explain. And the game does nothing to explain to you how this works. Essentially, it's like every 2 weeks, the number of Sparks of Fortune that you could possibly have, or the number of fractured Sparks of Fortune that you could possibly have, goes up by 1 every 2 weeks. And then you have to combine 2 of those with Valor Stones for some stupid reason to be able to turn that into, I don't know why the Valor Stones are there, to be able to turn those into a Spark of Fortune, which you can then use in things. And you can catch up on those if you missed them, or if you, like I just leveled a new alt the other day and I immediately got a whole bunch of these things. You can get caught up to a certain number of them, but finding out what that certain number is and where you are supposed to be at with these things, like, can I get another one right now if I need one, or can I not? I don't actually know, because I can't there's no easy way to keep track of how many of them you've gotten, how many of them you've used, and how many of them you can still get. There's macros, by the way, that you can use to do this, but having to run a macro to figure out how to get the first element that exists on your on crafting something in a crafting order, that's annoying to me. I don't like that. It feels sloppy. It feels it's just messy. I don't really like it. I feel like the game does a pretty bad job of explaining how sparks of, and again, this is mostly from the perspective of someone who's going to craft something and doesn't, like, they currently don't have a Spark of Fortune. Do you want to figure out how to get one? Can you even get one? Finding out if you can is annoying. If that was the only like weirdness about the crafting order system, I'd probably be okay with it, but let's move on, because there's more to it. There's also the missives to determine what secondary stats you want. And these annoy me because they come in different qualities, but the different qualities don't affect like the number of stats or anything on it. They just affect what the difficulty is with the recipe, which immediately means that then you as the customer are now having to think, wait, hold on. So if I get the better one, then I can get a crafter with a lower, like, you're now thinking about who is the crafter going to be in this situation, and what are they going to be able to make out of this, and are they skilled enough to be able to use the lower tier missive, or do I need to use the higher tier missive? Do I have to use the higher tier missive to be able to get to the max difficulty? Is that like required no matter what? And these are all things that as the customer I shouldn't have to think about. And that's the same with the embellishments as well, where the actual effect of the embellishment doesn't change based on the quality, at least as near as I can tell. A lot of them, it's kind of hard to tell if, like, because they're proc based, and all it just says is has a chance to do a thing. And like, side note, Blizzard, please stop with the like has a chance to kind of benefit you like this a little bit in tooltips. Just tell me what it friggin' does. I hate that. But anyway, it seems to be pretty much the same thing with the embellishments as well, where it just is a factor of how difficult it is, or how much it adds to the recipe difficulty, which in turn then goes back again to what is the crafter I'm going to need to make this thing? Are they going to have to spend a whole bunch of their concentration on this? It's a lot of thinking about the crafting of the item instead of asking for what the item you want is. And then, of course, there's the enchanted crests as well, if you want to go all the way up to a 675, which, by the way, the fact that you can craft a 675 weapon or get a 675 weapon crafted is insane. And it's very cool that that's a possibility. It's like, for a lot of people, that's going to be your best in slot, no matter what. This 675 gear that you can craft through this system because of, you know, the way that you acquire all this stuff. That it's cool that you can actually get these items made that are so good. It's just frustrating that you have to jump through all these hoops, and you really have to understand the not the entirety, but a significant portion of how the crafting system works. When you are the customer here, it's supposed to be the crafter that understands how this works, and then you just get the item. There's also the whole too many currencies problem in World of Warcraft right now, where there's just too many things that are exchanged for other things, or two different. Like, why does Kej exist? Like, there's so many. There's too many currencies in WoW right now. That's a whole different rant for a whole different topic, but it's kind of exacerbating this issue that I have with the crafting system by just being like again, why are Valor Stones part of this at all? And why is it using the same runes that I use, or the same crests that I use for upgrading my gear and engaging with that system to also craft this thing and so on? Like, it's just really messy. And I would be fine with a significant, like, I still think it would need to be pared down, but I'd be fine with a lot of the complexity behind the system if it was something that it was just the crafter, you know, the person who says, yes, I am a player who likes to do trade skills. I'm a player who wants to dig into professions and be good at one of these things. If it was just on that player who has opted into the depth of this system to figure all this stuff out, that's one thing, but it's not. the customer, the person who is saying, I want this axe. Now I have to figure out how blacksmithing works and how crafting works and all this other stuff to be able to understand just literally how to get all these different parts and which different parts I need and what that means for the crafter that I'm then looking for and so on. It ends up being overwhelming for a player who is wanting to just be like, I just want an axe, man. Just sell me an axe. And it doesn't help that the public order system is pretty much always the wrong thing to use. Like the crafting order system has this option to just throw it out to, hey, anyone who can craft this, go ahead and make this thing. But when you do that, you lose the ability to limit what you want the quality of it to be, which means that you're basically then guaranteed to get this crafted by somebody who's just trying to level their profession, which means that you're going to get the lowest possible quality of what this thing could be, which means that you've now wasted all of your materials on getting this thing crafted. That's just like, why does this even exist at this point? Why is this something that's such a heavy factor into the result of what I'm getting out of this thing? I assume the reason that they don't have the ability to select the quality requirement for public orders is because then no one would ever select. Like, why would you ever say, and you know what, I'm fine with this not being as good as it could be if you were a better crafter? No one would ever do that. You would always select the max quality result. But if they're going to remove the ability for you to say, I want to have the max quality result, then why even have public orders in the first place? It's literally just a trap at that point for a player who doesn't understand the crafting system as much, which is what the crafting orders are supposed to be there to help in the first place, is for players who are not crafters to be able to get a thing crafted. All it does is create this scenario in which someone who does not understand that they need a high skilled crafter to be able to make this item in order to get the maximum quality out of it, they've now had it made, and the result has been worse than what it could have been if they had found a crafter with a higher skill. It's literally just a trap. And honestly, the more I think about this whole crafting system, especially the crafting order system, the more I think a lot of my issues with it could be solved purely by making the UI not suck. Like, instead of the, oh, you'd like a two-handed axe, what do you want it to be made out of sort of thing, which is, it kind of goes back to the analogy of, oh, you'd like a car, how would you like us to make the tires on it? Like, I just want tires, man. Just give me tires on my car, please. And thank you. That's all I need. If it was presenting me with like, okay, what is the end result that you want? What do you want this item to be? Then give me a list of the ingredients that will be needed for actually crafting that. And for bonus points, tell me where to get them. Like, if you walked up to the crafting system and you went through and you, like, it actually already kind of starts with this flow and then just diverts into asking for what ingredients you want to put into it. Instead of asking for the ingredients, let me say, yes, I would like this axe. I would like the stats to be haste and mastery. I would like it to be 675 item level, and I would like it to have this embellishment on it. Then spit out the list of ingredients that I'm going to need for that as a result. As I'm selecting these things in the like drop downs or whatever, let it say, okay, then if you want this, this is what you need. If you want this, this is what you need. And if you have these items, this is what the difficulty will be. This is what the skill of the crafter will need to be able to make this thing. Do you want to lower the skill of the crafter? Then you need to get higher quality ingredients, and so on. This would also help with understanding things like, what does the recipe difficulty actually contribute? Like, with the things like the embellishments and the missives, like, do I need the maximum tier missive in order for this thing even be craftable in the first place? Just having me say, okay, yes, this is what I want, and I want it at this item level, and here's what I need. And then let me scale it up and down. Give me a little slider that says, okay, I want the max slider, max quality. This is the best the item could possibly be. Okay, this is what I need for that. That's a bit pricey. Let me scale that down a bit then. Okay, now this is something that I can actually go for. Having a system that goes from the perspective of, what do you want, and then works backwards to find out what materials and so on that you need to supply to the crafter for them to be able to make that for you, and figuring that math out on its own, instead of this weird system where it's like, again, would you like a cake? All right, what would you like me to make your cake out of? Should I put some flour in there? Do you want eggs in this cake? Would you like sugar? And what kind of sugar would you like? I don't know, man. I want a cake. I want a cake, and I want it to taste nice. That's what I'm looking for. I want a cake. I want it to be like this, vanilla flavor. There you go. Here's the list of ingredients now to provide to your chef to be able to have them create this cake. Ironically, the actual crafting UI does a much better job of this by actually, like, it shows like this is where you are at on the quality scale. If you want this to be the next quality up, here are some things that you can do that will increase the quality on this, including things like spending concentration and so on. The crafting UI does a much better job of all this. It's just the crafting orders UI that has this weird approach of, would you like this to be made? Okay, what do you want it made out of? To be clear, I am fine with the fact that it is a complex crafting. In fact, I very much am interested. I find it very appealing, the idea of having a complex and deep crafting system inside of World of Warcraft, something that has all of these moving parts and has all these different things that you can optimize and work with to create the best possible product. I just feel like all of that work and effort needs to be on the crafter, the person who has opted into the trade skill gameplay, the person who has said, this is an appealing gameplay loop to me. I want to invest my time and energy in figuring out how all of this works so that I can make the best possible items. That should be on the crafter, not on the person who's just like, I just want a good axe, man. Anyway, I think that's really what it boils down to for me, is deep and enriching crafting experiences are totally possible inside of MMORPGs. We've seen examples of them in the past. It's the sort of thing that I would love to see WoW get right. I just think right now a little bit too much of it is on the it's on the customer to figure out how the crafting system works instead of on the crafter to understand the entirety. Because like the crafter needs to understand all this stuff too, obviously, but too much of it is passed on as extra like mental burden on the customer. With at the end of the day, they're just trying to get their axe made so that they can go do stuff. But I'm going to wrap that rant up there. Please do hit me up if you have any questions or additional thoughts or anything you'd like me to expand on this whole thing. This video took me a while to get together. It's nearly 2 a.m. as I am finishing recording this right now. And I started working on this like this morning. I just ended up having to do a lot of digging into everything. And because it's getting late as I'm recording this, but I really wanted to get this video out, it's entirely possible that I have just straight up forgotten something that I wanted to get to, or messed up some sort of aspect of how things work, or misspoke, or anything along those lines. So please do hit me up if you have any questions or anything you would like to expand on, like me to expand on a little bit more. I do genuinely love profession gameplay. I just don't think WoW has ever really gotten it right. And I think what frustrates me the most about the system that currently exists inside the War Within is it's so close to being what I want, and then just kind of veers off at the last minute into the customer telling the chef how to bake the cake. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on. I do have a couple of things that I want to respond to that came in from the previous episode. One is just like a general just reaction to a lot of the comments that came in, because the last episode, obviously we were talking about Raid Finder. And I was talking about the idea of how to take Raid Finder, which already exists, and plus it up, make it something even nicer, make it something that a lot more people would be excited to participate in. And a lot of people seem to generally agree with that sort of notion, but there were also a lot of people who they were talking about Raid Finder. They're like, well, I like LFR, and the reason I like LFR is because that's the only way that I get to raid. And that's perfectly valid. There was never any point for that video of me saying no one likes LFR. I feel like there are a lot more people who dislike it than do like it. But if you like LFR, more power to you. My whole point of that video was some ideas on how to take something that, even if you do already like it, make it into something that's nicer, make it into a better experience for everyone who's there, and maybe make it into something that even more people would like to participate. There were a few people who seemed to take my comments as me saying LFR should be removed. And they were like, well, but you have to, blah, blah, blah. Why do people want LFR removed? That's not it at all. I was literally just trying to talk about a better way to make LFR exist. So yeah, I guess in response to that general notion of things, I am still very supportive of LFR's existence. I strongly believe that if it wasn't for LFR, WoW would have probably stopped having raiding a long time ago because of a whole bunch of other reasons, of like being able to create content that a larger portion of the player base can even participate in. So LFR is ultimately a good thing for World of Warcraft. I just think it's something that could be done in such a way that people can experience and have a little bit more fun with it. That's all that was. And the fact that it's the only way that you get to raid doesn't mean that it can't be improved and can't be made better in some way or another. I do have one other question that I want to answer, which came in from Velheim, who asked, with SOD Phase 8 coming up in April and the Scarlet Enclave raids release now imminent, where do you imagine SOD goes from here just as a version of the game? Do they push for more new content and a Phase 9 and beyond, or do you imagine this quote-unquote experiment is coming to an end sooner than later? So SOD Phase 8 actually is releasing the day that this video is going up, so I'm excited to check that out. I will be streaming myself, checking that out over on my Twitch page if you feel like checking that out. I haven't played SOD since Phase 4. Yes, since Phase 4. So I've got a lot of catching up to do, a lot of refiguring out how SOD even works, but I'm excited to jump back into it. I've been told that a lot of things have been streamlined, and it should be fun. As far as where SOD goes in the long term, I've talked about this a little bit way back in the day in terms of where things could end up going for a Season of Discovery. I think the important, like, sort of where my head starts with this whole thing is that they're still calling it Season of Discovery, which means that it is seasonal content in some capacity, which means that there is a high likelihood that there is a point where this season ends and then another new season begins. And I would hope that they utilize a ton of what they've learned from SOD going into whatever that new season is. That would probably be a case of I don't know if there's a possibility of SOD legacy servers or something like that, where they just maybe they merge everything into one. It's like, here's your character that you play. Because at this point, people have been playing their SOD characters for a year and a half. Like, it's been a while that SOD has been around. And I don't see Blizzard being able to say, okay, well, all these characters are just dead now. I also don't think these characters can move over to Legacy Vanilla. I don't think that can happen either. So there's almost going to be a necessity that these characters stick around in some capacity. I don't see, well, I'll put it this way. It would be a very bad idea for Blizzard to say, and Season of Discovery is over and all those characters are gone now. I don't think that would work. I also don't think it would work for them to just port everything over to Legacy WoW and say, you just don't have all these abilities and gear and you never did this raid and that sort of thing anymore. So they're going to need to figure out some sort of way to let these characters live on in some capacity, which to me means probably just setting aside a server that they say, all right, we're not going to update this. There's nothing going on over here, but if you want to go mess with this character again, you can. That seems relatively inevitable to me. And then maybe they leave that there for a while. And then after some period of time has passed, eventually go, okay, nobody's logging into these characters anymore. We're going to take this server down. If you want to log in and get screenshots of your character before it goes away, you can, but this has run its course. But I think that would be the sort of thing that would take quite a while of this has been dead and gone for a while for them to get to. I do see the strong possibility that this will eventually reach an end. Of course, now that I think about it, I'm actually of two minds. There is the possibility that they decide to branch off and go into like TBC or something and continue this same experiment going on into the next expansion. I think it would need a rebrand away from Season of Blank in order for that to continue, but maybe not. Maybe they say, okay, now it's the Season of Burning or something, and we're going into TBC. That would be one option. Personally, I would love to see a round 2 essentially of Season of Discovery where they go back and say, okay, we're going to do the leveling sprints thing again from 1 to 60 where we have these periods of time. And maybe this time, instead of BFD, maybe we do something, we do a revamped, I don't know, Wailing Caverns raid or something, at the start of that like level band or something like that. Go around to some different content that existed at the time, and existed in these level bands and explore that a little bit more. Would love to see that as an option as well. Lots of different ways I can see them going with it. I would be surprised if there is a phase 9, at least like a phase 9 that adds a ton more, like another raid or anything, to Season of Discovery, though it is possible. But we are reaching the point where the game is going to start to, there probably already is. I have to catch up on Season of Discovery and see where things actually are. But one of the core problems that original WoW had that they ended up changing a bunch of stuff to counteract in the Burning Crusade, is there's a point where the power creep eventually, like you're eventually going to run into people with 100% crit chance and stuff like that. Like you're going to reach a point where the stats and stuff that you're putting on gear is so strong that in order to make an upgrade to it, you have to do these ridiculous over the top things. Like this now increases your crit chance by 10% on this pair of bracers and stuff like that, which just gets nutty. So I would be surprised if they keep going for too much longer. Like I could see a phase 9 that's mostly just like quality of life changes and maybe like a harder difficulty of stuff, but not really extra gear or anything like that. But I don't know. Maybe I'll change my mind after having jumped back into it and gotten caught up on everything and experienced it. I do, though, really hope that they find some way for these characters to still stick around for people, because again, it's now been there. There are a lot of games that have not, like full games that have not lasted as long as Season of Discovery. So people are definitely going to have attachments to their SOD characters. I would love to see a way for that like existence to continue to go on in some capacity, whether that's moving on to TBC or just saying, okay, we're going to merge everything into one server and these characters can just sit here and you can play them if you want, but that's kind of the end of it. And then they move on to a new seasonal thing of some variety. I guess those were the two options. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up because, as mentioned previously, it's now very late as I'm recording this video and I can feel my brain stopping. So I'm going to call it there. Thanks again to my patrons. You guys are wonderful. If you are not a patron, please do head over to patreon.com/Devilor and give it a look. All of the support is really, really appreciated. It helps me keep this thing going late into the night, as you can see. I apologize that the early upload for this video is not going to be as early. That's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes, but we're going to keep on keeping on, and hopefully the rest of that sound. I really have no idea where I was going with that. Yeah, we're kind of falling apart at the end of this episode, so I'm just going to make it quick. Devilor.com if you want to check out merch. Twitch.tv/Devilor if you want to check out my streams. And I'm done now. I'm going to stop talking. Thanks again, everybody. I'll see you next time.